So, welcome, Joanne, to the Solutions podcast. And recently, I got to have a moment speaking with you on your Inclusions Bites podcast. So welcome here, and good to see you.
Nicola, thank you. We've met in person a couple of times, and the podcast was brilliant. And I love talking to you about environmental issues.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm really wanting us to explore today. So first, for the listeners and the viewers that don't know you, could you just introduce yourself and give a little bit of background of who you are and what your interests are?
Joanne, Lockwood. My pronouns are she and her. I am, in quotes, the inclusive culture expert. So I'm a professional speaker and a workshop facilitator and a consultant. So I work in in layperson's language, the inclusion and belonging, D&I, all those acronyms around diversity and inclusion. The wokerati, I think we're called by GB News. So I promote positive people experiences in businesses throughout the UK and further afield, wherever they're flying me. So yeah, that's the kind of thing I do. I'm also chair of the Professional Speaking Association and a fellow of the Professional Speaking Association. And if you're curious about my voice, if you only listen to this on the audio, I'm also a transgender woman in my late 50s, to give you a bit of context as well.
So I like that you're actually using the hashtag positive people experience. So that kind of says it all. And also, this week we're speaking is LGBTQ History Week. So let's start off with some of those solutions, some of those wins, that this is a very different conversation than 20 years ago. Now, how far have we come now? What are the solutions? What are the wins that you would say that the LGBTQ community have had?
Yeah, I think it was last year, the year before, that was the 50th anniversary of Pride and the uprising at Stonewall riots in the New York area back in 68, 69, whichever year that was. And I think the first Pride was in 1970, 1971, I think, those sort of eras. And yeah, it was back in those days. It was before the Gay Liberation Front, the GLF, before lesbianism, if you like, was recognised and included. It was all around being gay. It was all around the criminalisation, if you like, or the stigma and stigmatization of homosexual behavior. Interestingly, through history, lesbianism, if you like, has never been criminalized. It's just significantly frowned upon in the UK, around the world, maybe. So how far have we come? I always think about this as an infinite journey, and there's always further to go. But we could look at being queer, being gay is no longer stigmatized in the way it was. I'm not saying we fixed it. We haven't fixed it. There's still a lot of instances of homophobic behavior, violence against people who are motivated to be violent against people who are queer. Discrimination in the workplace still exists, but largely in society, being queer is no longer a shameful act. In fact, people are proud. We have pride. People are proud to be out and open. You can now give blood in the UK as a queer man without having to answer any different questions than if you were a straight man. Before, you were effectively barred for giving blood if you'd had a male partner within the previous 10 years, I think, whatever it was. We see more queer representation on television, Strictly Come Dancing, mainstream media, queer characters. You think back to EastEnders, Colin and Barry, I think it was, the two characters with the first on-screen gay kiss at the primetime TV on a soap opera sort of thing. And they broke new ground, and they got a lot of hate. And back in those days, it was hate mail. I mean, physically, people had to write to them. Now it'd be a Twitter storm. But yeah, so we're seeing that's kind of people don't bat an eyelid. So Strictly Come Dancing, gay couples, a couple of years running, both male and female gay couples. So yeah, we have gay members of parliament, with people representing us in all aspects of life. So yeah, we have. Let's not decry. We've come a long way, but we have yeah, and this infinite journey, we can always do better. You still have to come out as queer. You know, straight people don't come out as straight. Straight people are still the default. Trying to find representations of Christmas cards and birthday cards with if I'm trying to buy my wife something, it's really difficult. You can't find a representation, not through Hallmark and the mainstream. You know, the default is just it's a straight. Even Colin the Caterpillar, when Marks and Spencer launched Colin the Caterpillar in his love nest, it was Colin and Connie. It was a straight couple. And I think it took a bit of campaigning to have the option to have a Colin and Colin or a Connie and Connie. I think they launched it after a while. So that times are changing, but people who are outside of maybe the gay queer community have their blinkers on. They see the default as being straight in their lives, and they don't often think about representation. So that's what I would say. If you think about the LGB element of the LGBT alphabet, so as I mentioned already, I'm a trans woman. There's still, we look at where we were in 2018 with Theresa May's Conservative government talking around reform of the gender recognition process, more queer acceptance. There was an LGBT action plan, which kind of within a year or two, it got completely canned or rediverted. Certainly all the work that was around the Gender Recognition Act, we've seen what's gone on in Scotland around how the UK government under Section 35 blocked the Scottish reform, and how the government has also now created a list of countries that have what they would call is a robust gender recognition process, and those who are less than robust. So basically what they're saying is you have to meet the UK's rigid standards of what it means to be trans in order to be recognised as trans, even if from another country now. So even if Scotland's legislation did pass, they would probably go on the blacklist of countries that didn't have a robust enough process. So it's this. So and there's no non-binary recognition in any of this legislation. So if you're non-binary, you can't have a passport, a driving license, or even your birth certificate updated to recognise that. So I could sit here and talk about all of the problems, and they are still there. And we see the rise of transphobic media, the right-wing press, the Tory party leadership competition, where after Boris left before Rishi, there was that little hiatus in the middle of there. I think it was a race to the bottom. It was a race to the bottom. It was who could be the most transphobic, and Penny Mordaunt was one of the contenders, and she was almost vilified for being trans-friendly, and the other contenders we're trying to use trans issues as a wedge, and I foresee it this year with the UK elections coming up, that trans people are going to come under the firing line again and be used as a whipping post to show political sort of, I don't know, leadership, and say, well, we're not for trans people. We're going to throw trans people under a bus. We'll just become pawns, and that really concerns me. And I think that's a reality. So. Yeah, to answer the question, how far have we come? Yes, we've come a long way. We have come a long way. Have we got a long way to go? Yep. In the same way, the World Economic Forum are talking about 70 or 80 years for gender equality. Gender equality. This is not talking about queer equality, gender equality, 20 odd years. So we've come a long way in gender equality, but we've still got a hell of a long way to go.
Absolutely. And we feel like there are all these stepping stones, aren't there? But even things that which is quite classic, that I hadn't heard of GLF, but I'm very kind of au fait with ALF and ELF. So these worlds, which is the Animal Liberation Front, and ELF is the Earth Liberation Front, and they are really known as these very radical groups. And so then we have the GLF. And so we have all these kind of like little posses of people in their own worlds that are quite unaware of these other people that are, working towards justice, whether that's justice for people, justice for animals, justice for the environment. There are all these groups working on justice. And I think that's what's really interesting for me, is how we can start to kind of overlap these realities. And I know that Joanne works a lot with inclusion. And so what inclusion means to you could be what is different what inclusion means to me. So, you know, when I think of the word inclusion, I immediately think of those who on the front line of the environmental, you know, mess we've got, the where it's most polluted. That's where the poorest live. That's where the people of color live. And, you know, this inclusivity, this equality isn't there. So you'll find those kind of marginalized people are there where the places are most environmentally affected. So, you know, as we kind of like talk about, you know, moving forward to where we were and where we are now, where we're starting to get more rights, and, you know, we've got a lot more gay rights that are happening now than only a few years ago. Animals, you know, have got some rights. Nature still doesn't have rights, but we are working on that as the next big thing. That doesn't nature deserve rights as well? In New Zealand, there are rivers that have been given rights. The river has a right to flow. So, you know, this is a really broad kind of topic, but this world of environmental rights and environmental justice and social rights and social justice or injustice. So my question really is, how can we bring these two worlds together and actually see the similarities rather than the differences?
Yeah, I mean, let me start. I did a talk to an environmental charity called Plant Life, who basically, from what I understand, care for plant life, as it says, you know, looking for rare species. They work with National Trust and other organizations to catalogue and research and look after. And I did a talk at one of their events, and I started by talking about diversity. And then I started, and the diversity I talked about was biodiversity. So we understand the need in our planetary ecosystem to have diversity of species, of plants and rivers. And I think we, as a species, a human species, start to appreciate the knock-on effect of it's just a snail, but it's not just a snail, because that snail does this, and then something that feeds off of does what the snail produces. And if we don't have the fish in the pond because it's not oxygenating enough, there's not the plants in there to create the oxygen, and we get the cover and the canopies over it, stagnates the water. And then the river dies off, which means the animals die off, and the tree, and all of a sudden we have a desert. So we start to understand the cause and effect around biodiversity, and every single part of that puzzle is an integral part to that entire ecosystem. And we start to learn now that if we carry on as we are, we'll get beyond that tipping point where things will take a lot more than a generation to recover, potentially a millennia to recover. I think when we think about the intersection between people and the environment, we have to recognize in an organization that when we think about well-being and inclusion for our people, we have to also care for what they care about. If people care about the environment, then that's important. As an organization, we also care about the environment. We see people at Davos each year. We see the people at the climate summit, COP26 or 28, wherever we're at to these days, talk about all these initiatives to cut carbon emissions, because at the end of the day, those things are actually going to benefit human existence. So I'm thinking about my own existence and that of my yet unborn grandchildren, that we need to create a planet that works for them. So organizations I work for, work with, I don't want to see them being polluting or wastefulness. I want them to talk about their credentials and not paying lip service to it, but also being authentic in what they're doing. So I want you to care about me and care about what I care about. That's where you get this sense of belonging. There's that alignment of values. And there's been things in the paper recently about our Prime Minister taking a private jet to do what he could have done on the train. And that is disingenuous of a government that is trying to set out its green credentials. And yes, they can have a reason or excuse saying there's time schedules and all these kind of things. But sometimes you actually need to put the planet first and and set those things as a guiding North Star so that everyone can follow that lead. So I think there's a lot of synergy there, just in the belongingness, just in the recognizing that in order to help people thrive, the environment has to thrive as well.
Because ultimately, people say, save the planet, save the earth. The earth will be fine. It's humans that will go. And, the earth itself has survived six extinctions, but this incredible life force of the microbes and the bacteria, you can't kill them, whatever you try, they will still be here. But what we're looking at really is human life continuing as we know it now in a world of agriculture. So that's the really big shift that we have to know, that it's like, how do we really find that way of living in harmony with the planet? And that's, not taking more than we need, and looking at those actions and and bringing it back absolutely to the politicians. I mean, we saw that at COP, this great big climate conference, and they're all flying backwards and forwards for a weekend, rather than even just going there once and staying once. There was kind of like this toing and froing to the conference by plane. So we're not really getting it. There's a lot of what we talk about as, box checking and greenwashing and, having the sustainability agenda kind of ticked off. Yes, we've done sustainability. Yes, we've done diversity, but how we can dig a bit deeper into this. And so I am also the co-founder of the Southeast Climate Alliance. And the reason I wanted to bring all these groups together is that I could see that there were all these little groups that were all wanting to do the same thing, but they were all lots of little groups. And when we come together, there's that great African saying, one stick is easily broken, but a bundle can't be. When we bring groups of us with similar, interests together, we are stronger. So, I went from inviting 12 groups at our first meeting, and 4 years later, we've now got over 130 organizations under our umbrella. And although we talk about our umbrella, the Southeast Climate Alliance is for social, environmental, and faith-based organizations working on climate and ecological solutions. The social side, there's not many groups that have kind of come forward and said, okay, we want to be in your group, we want to be together. So we still, although we're kind of open to groups that's their focus, is how can we align more? Because whether it's also to do with we're all so busy and we think, we can't take on anything else. But that the Vesica Pisces, where there's overlapping of the social movement and the environmental movement, and how we can bring them together and find that way of working together. So that was a great example with plant life. Is there any other thoughts you have around that?
Yeah, well, I'm as you probably know, my background, I was a techie, sort of into computers and things like that. So I kind of grew up in a world with Linux and Ubuntu, and I never really knew what Ubuntu meant until I started thinking about it deeply. I am because we are. And I think talk about the bundle of sticks, and one stick can be broken, the bundle is harder to break. I am because we are. The we are is also the planet. I only exist because the planet is here. I only exist because I can breathe the oxygen. I only exist because there's sufficient for me to eat and consume. So I think we have to sort of take an honest look. And one of the things that I find in my work, talking with people, is that there's a feeling you can't make a difference on your own. You look at everybody else. Nobody else cares. Why should I care? China, India, Russia are polluting and focusing on oil, and everyone thinks, well, hang on a minute, if they're doing that, we're losing competitive advantage. We've got to keep burning fuel. So I think sometimes you've actually got to take a stand and say, well, actually, I can't change the world, but I can change me. I can't change the government, but I can change what I do. I can try and minimize my journeys. I can try and use more efficient ways of consuming, consume less, work on sufficiency rather than abundance and gluttony, if you like. And just I think having it in your mind, and being a planetary ally, be comfortable with calling people out. Really, you're making all those journeys, or really, couldn't we get the train? Is there a train option available for this, rather than everyone have to drive? Those sort of things. So, or can we meet online? So I think that if we all take responsibility for calling it out, and at least having a conversation, we may not change our minds, but first step is having a conversation and bring it to the forefront of people's minds. I think is the battle.
Yeah.
And I have a saying as well. You talked about your sticks. I'm a great believer. When people use the word snowflake as a pejorative sort of insult, I say, well, great. I'm happy to be a snowflake, because the thing about it is, one snowflake hits the ground and melts and disappears. Billions and billions of snowflakes create an avalanche, and avalanches change landscapes. So if all of us snowflakes can get together and create social change, a momentum will generate from that will transform landscapes.
And the wonder is that no two snowflakes are the same. That beauty again in diversity. So we can all contribute differently. We can all be ourselves in that as well, contribute differently. Yeah, I agree. And I think there's also this, to really start thinking about, we are all Earth citizens. We're not subjects, we're citizens. Each one of us is alive at this time on this planet. We all contribute, and we take and we give in different ways. So, what does citizenship really mean of this earth? And like you just said, absolutely, people are very much like, oh, well, I'm just one person. It's pointing the finger. Yep, look at China, look at India. But my answer to that is always, well, look in your cupboards and see where everything came from. We buy so much from overseas, but we don't think there's anything to do with us. And we've really, rather than kind of citizens, we're just consumers now. And that coming round to, well, if you're a consumer, you can make that choice to be a good citizen and make those conscious decisions about how that affects the planet in your choice. So a lot of what we're saying is that it's the value diversity. This is how nature operates. Integrate, don't segregate. These are all principles in nature, in life all around us. I think the more we can learn from the natural world, and we really haven't been looking, we haven't been asking the right questions to nature. And this is actually a classic which has just happened to me in the last few weeks. I was contacted by some organizations that are doing great work alongside Lawyers for Nature and getting nature on the board. So there's been a huge movement, hats off to Faith in Nature, who were the first organization to do this. Now other companies are wanting to do the same, put nature on the board. So they asked me, could you speak to some Indigenous people and ask them what their definition of nature is? Because if you look up what does nature mean, in all the dictionaries, it doesn't include humans. So if our current definition of nature is it's something out there, it's the ocean, it's the forests, it's the animals, it's everything else, but humans are not a part of nature. There we see where the first step we fall at, that we don't see ourselves as a part of nature. So I'm asked, could you ask some Indigenous people, we need to write a new dictionary definition. And so as I've been asking people, well, hey, what's your definition of nature? Is it animate? Is it inanimate? What is it? So I asked my friends, and they kind of like say to me, well, it's territory. It's our ancestral territory. It's where we live. And I'm keeping on probing, asking. So, but we need a paragraph. We need a nice tight paragraph for the dictionary. What is nature? And none of them could give me an answer. Because it's such a ridiculous question. Nature is everything. It's absolutely everything.
Yeah.
So the way we look in a Western world of this separation, it's all about this divisiveness. You know, what's your gender? What's your color? What's your sex? What's your politics? It's all about dividing. Whereas in nature, it's about cooperation and how everything can also work together.
As you were speaking there, I was thinking the words that come into my head, it's like, what's nature? It's the air we breathe, it's the food we eat, and the world we bring our children into. If you think about life as a cycle, eating, drinking, breathing, and procreation are kind of the major key things. And I suppose the other thing is the wonder that stimulates us, if you like, in there as well. That's I've never thought of nature as being not me. But I suppose that's true. You define nature as it's not me. I'm the privileged animal, if you like, in this on this planet. Nature is everything that is not me. It's the other, the thing I don't have to care about or I don't have to worry about. I care about humans. I don't have to worry about nature. Nature will look after itself. It's everlasting, ever present, omnipresent. It exists forever. But I think, yeah, I was thinking about also, a goldfish in a bowl. What is nature to the goldfish? It's the water that it exists in, and we are the goldfish in our bowl of the planet. It's the environment which we exist in, and it supports us in the same way that water supports a goldfish. The planet supports us and gives us a reason.
And quite often this idea of, the other, being still very tribal humans, and we kind of segregate ourselves into my tribe, your tribe. And we forget that we are totally, as humans, dependent on bacteria. Insides our guts, all over our skin, the mites in our eyelashes. We're totally covered in all these other life forms. And we just couldn't exist without them. We would die. But our earth, our bodies, is like a little earth, because we're covered in all these other microbes which we're totally dependent on. So there isn't any way of living separately. And often when I go in and I'm asked to give a talk at a school, and I'll show a big picture of a city surrounded by forest. And I'll say to the kids, which bit's nature? And they will all point to the forest. And I will say, well, what about the city? Is that nature? No. So from an early age, we have this belief that no, nature is that green bit out there. And us humans are different. And I had an analogy, which was like, well, we're just like the fleas on a dog. And do we even realize that we're on a dog? Does the flea realize that it's on a dog? So, how can we actually see that which unites us and find these ways of finding that, that which unites us? That's really what it comes down to, isn't it? How we can all, help each other, support each other's movements as we move forward.
Isn't nature derived from natural, or is natural derived from nature? So the concrete of the city, at what point is that natural? The fact that a human created it, does that make it any less natural? Is kind of your definition. If it's man-made, it's not nature. It's kind of, I think, the definition, isn't it? We see it as, that's the difference. If nature is something that exists without human involvement, if you like, it's self-sustaining without us. Although now we're causing jeopardy to that longevity, or that's a self-sustaining cycle, if you like. So yeah, nature is something that we don't create. It's created before us and after us.
Yeah. Well, before we come to an end, I'd like to just bring it back to, our two worlds colliding. And obviously, I'm a part of many different environmental organizations that are working to help protect our planet in many, many different ways. So how do you think we as an environmental movement could communicate with the social movement. Have you got any ideas of what would be a good way for us to approach, and yeah, that terminology, that we have our different terms? And
yeah, I mean, I think we talked about this earlier, but one of my sayings is positive people experiences. And I also say often that we want to create a world where people can thrive. And we need to exist in a world where we can safely thrive and believe in its future, both in the workplace and, you know, in nature, if you like, because I can only thrive if the environment I live in will allow me to thrive and survive in that area. And I think I can only have a positive experience if I'm able to enjoy the food I eat, the air I breathe, and what I see, the wonder of the world, because we know that as humans, we need daylight, we need social interaction, we need expanse to be able to enjoy something bigger than us. So I think we have to care in order to create a positive experience in our lives. We have to have that social side, but also the world we live in. You know, we put a fish in a dirty tank, it dies. We put ourselves in a dirty planet, we will die. Maybe not in my generation, but in generations to come. We've already seen a lowering of sperm count in men observed around the world. I'm not sure that anyone's drawn a conclusion, but it's likely to be microplastics or other things that are influencing these physiological changes in us as a species. So I can't necessarily fix the planet for me, but I can start putting mechanisms in place for my children's children and their children's children. Because at some point, when do we say stop? Otherwise, it's not our problem, it's somebody else's. And it's always somebody else's. Industrial revolution, before that, we can clearly see in the stratas of the earth, we can tell the difference between pre-industrial and post-industrial in looking at the earth. Had they realized at that time that what they were doing with the pollution was going to cause an impact, I'm sure we'd never embark down the same industrialization that we do now. So we've got to recognize, in order for me and me as a human to thrive and survive and enjoy, it's got to be a combination, as I say, and nature it's got to be a significant part of that.
It's interesting. You just reminded me about this, you know, kind of this mutating that we see in the rivers. You know, species in the rivers are changing sex. And that has been looked at as plastics have this mimic estrogen. So, you know, this breaking down into the waters, and, you know, if it can actually, you know, be changing sex of creatures living in aquatic systems, you know, how also is that affecting the rest of us? They talk about, you know, girls that are developing breasts much earlier than they ever did. And again, that comes back to, you know, all these additional hormones and fake mimic estrogens that are in our environment. So there's more and more data that is showing the kind of the human impacts on us. And I love that, you know, absolutely, the fish in a dirty bowl, you know, how well does it thrive? Because it's not good enough to just be alive. You know, we want to thrive as a species on this planet alongside everything else, and really to value that diversity. So thank you, Joanne, so much for coming along and having this chat. And I look forward to the next time we can further on our conversation.
Thank you, Nicola. I've really enjoyed it as well, and look forward to seeing you soon.
And I will put your links, your great work at See Change Happen, which is exactly what we want to see change happen in all areas. And I will add those links on to the rest of this after this podcast and this video log. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.